So good evening, everyone, members and members of the public as well. And also those of you who may well be watching this remotely and through the live streaming service, which we offer here at Lichfield District Council. So a very warm welcome to you all for this planning meeting here on December the 6th. And which it's just a one-item agenda. And so I'm going to start off with the first item on the agenda, which, as normal, is apologies for absence. Now, I know that we've had councillors Powell, Harvey, Coggins and Hughes have all sent their apologies. Do we have any others, please?
Councillor Galvin, so I can submit them if he's not here.
So Councillor Galvin, you think, has sent apologies. Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, members, for that. We now move on to item 2 on the agenda, members, which is declarations of interest. Does anyone have a declaration which they need to make known to us now? Thank you very much. I think that's a no, isn't it? Yes, that's okay. Thank you very much. Item 3 on your agenda is minutes of the previous meeting. They have been circulated electronically. So I'm going to ask you, members, whether you feel as though that represents a true and correct record of the proceedings which took place on the date of the last meeting, which was the 27th. Sorry, yes, I'm getting completely losing my dates now. As Christmas approaches, my calendar goes completely haywire. So on the 27th of November, if you're happy with those minutes, would you please just show? Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So we now move on to item 4 on the agenda, which is the single planning application which we have to discuss this evening. And this is item 22/01612/FULM. It's the National Memorial Arboretum, Croxall Road at Alrewes. And the reason for this being on the agenda is that this is a planning application being reported to us at the Planning Committee, as the officer recommendation is against an objection from the Environment Agency, which is a statutory consultee for applications of this scale and located within flood zones 2 and 3, which this site, of course, is, being adjacent to the river there at Alrewes. So that's the reason why it's coming to this Planning Committee this evening. So I'm going to now ask the Senior Planning Officer, which is Sarah Atherton. And Sarah, you're going to give us a presentation, aren't you, for this?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
And thank you very much indeed. I'll hand over to you then now. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This particular application is reference 22/01612/FULM, and it refers to the site at the National Memorial Arboretum. I'll just highlight don't think whether that's actually working now. Is that working? No.
It's there. It's on a laptop. Laptop was in the way.
Is it? Right, I'll close that in a minute. Right. There we go. Yeah. Right. So the site outlined in red in front of you. It's part of the wider National Arboretum site. The works involved in this particular planning application is to rework the levels of the site, reshape the water body, which on this instance is located in this area here. And this is the pond, or the old silt pond, that was part of the former tarmac site. A refreshment and amenity outlet, a multi-purpose building with pathways and water features, which are all part of the new wooded area and memorial. The site's located, as you can probably see, as part of the Arboretum, and it sits northwest of the main Arboretum site and shares boundaries with the original tarmac site, the railway viaduct and the wider National Memorial. The site has been referred to you this evening, given the EA objection. This is particularly important as the site is within flood zone 3. The memorial woodland is classified as acceptable and is what the Environment Agency consider as water compatible. So it's acceptable in flood zone 3, in particular flood zone 3B. The buildings themselves fall as considered to be less vulnerable. However, they are whilst they're less vulnerable, they should not be permitted in flood zone 3B. So the EA have got a formal or statutory objection in terms of this particular submission. The site has been accompanied by a full and detailed FRA and drainage strategy, and those results conclude there is no loss of any floodplain storage, and the development will not cause additional or any flood risk elsewhere. It has also been accompanied by a very detailed flood management plan, evacuation plan, and adequate and proper ground levels have been agreed with the EA. And as such, the EA are now satisfied, whilst they do still continue to have a policy objection, that they recommend that the LPA are here to consider and be satisfied that this development provides a wider sustainability benefit. And we can then confirm whether or not this building can then, or development can be constructed, as we consider that the additional flood volume and flood storage is accepted. In this instance, the report in front of you recommends that there are wider public benefits, ecological benefits. There is a very comprehensive tree planting and management support report. And this has obviously been taken in accordance with and supporting the Lake Queen's Green Canopy initiative, which the Arboretum is fully supportive of. There is also no objections in terms of access and parking, and there are very much wider and health and recreational benefits. In this instance, if members are minded to approve this, subject to the referral to the Secretary of State with the report and the suggested conditions. And I'll quickly take you through the photographs just to give you a flavour of the site. As you can see, the site situated within the red boundary. Part of the red boundary is within East Staffordshire, and they have a similar application, so it's actually a cross boundary. Only about 0.76 of a hectare is actually within East Staffordshire. This is the site in particular that we're looking at, and this is a Google shot with the rivers, and obviously, as you can see, it's very much within the floodplain of the Tame and the River Trent. And some photographs taken across the site. I'm sorry, they're a little bit it's very difficult to get a decent photograph and give you context, but when you're in the site, it's sort of rough, and it's very flat. Doesn't have an awful lot. There's some undulating things. It's quite bare. It's been stripped before, and that's actually regrown. It's reed bed area, which is at the top part of the site, which in this instance it's around here. So the reed beds are all around this end of the site. And this was taken a couple of days ago when it was actually quite bright and frosty. But this is the water body that is part of the actual wider scheme. This is the proposed plan of the detail of the garden itself. It's a memorial for the COVID pandemic and has a detail of water reflection, water features, and a beautiful sort of woodland walk with reflective spaces set out within there, and a considerable amount of tree planting and greenery. There are some sections to give you some context of the wider area and the context of the site and its intervisibility, which, as I said, in terms of levels, it isn't substantial, but there are increases in levels. And these are some of the drawings in terms of the buildings. They are quite curvilinear, so they have quite a sort of curvaceous nature to them, quite modern. And as I said, they sit well within the landscape setting of the wider area of this particular memorial area. A couple of shots of the other buildings. So it's quite an unusual, and they're designed with sustainability in mind. And this is the sort of reflective taken from the agent's report, and it basically looks at the walk that you take through the Arboretum garden itself. So you start at the bottom. Now, if I can get the red, there we go. You start down here, so you can actually reflect over still water, and it allows space and time to stand and reflect. and you take the walk through to the pond, which is it basically moves, so it's actually a moving water. It sort of ripples out, so it has a feature within there, and then you can walk basically through the park, through the cascades, further out towards a misting water feature which creates a rainbow at the end. So it's quite a significant amount of work and design emphasis has been put into this, including the sort of the water features and the woodland area, which is very landscaped. And that takes you to the end of the presentation. Thank you.
So I'd like to thank the Senior Planning Officer, Sarah Atherton, for taking us through this very interesting report. And thank you very much, Sarah, for that. Very interesting. And I say it now, but I think we're extremely fortunate to have the National Memorial Arboretum within our district and on our doorstep. And I think it performs a wonderful service for not just people locally, but obviously nationally and even now, I think, internationally as well. I'm going to call upon the speaker that we have this evening, and the speaker is Maria Stacey. And Maria Stacey represents the Pegasus Group. They are the agents for the applicant. And so I'd like to just invite Maria Stacey to the table, please. You have a microphone in front of you. I'm not sure whether you've worked one of these before, but if you press the middle button, you've got 3 little buttons at the front. If you press the middle one, a little green light will come on, and then you'll get a red light up here, and that proves that you're then live. So if I can just say, you'll have 5 minutes. You probably know the form anyway, but you have 5 minutes, and with 30 seconds still to go, if you're still speaking, then Christine on my left will inform you that you have 30 seconds left. And at the end of 5 minutes, if you are still speaking, you must cease immediately, and your time will start as soon as you begin your address. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair, members. Firstly, thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening in support of the application. The scheme before you today is of national significance. It is also of great significance to the Arboretum to sustain its role as the nation's year-round place to remember. I don't have to remind members that the COVID-19 pandemic was a rare catastrophe that affected all aspects of society across the world. This is a poignant part of our social history that affected every single person in the UK. The proposed Woodland Memorial will provide a focal place for reflection and contemplation for the impact of this globally significant event, as well as other causes. The creation of a new woodland would provide a permanent home for the millions of individual and collective stories to ensure that they are preserved for generations to come. We have collaborated with your officers and relevant stakeholders on the scheme that you see before you today. The scheme is before you because of the location of the proposed buildings in the floodplain. The main steer of the National Flooding Policy is avoidance of flood risks to people and property so far as possible. But it is clear, with reference to the National Planning Policy Framework, that a risk-based approach means that there will be instances where a planning judgment must be made. The majority of the Arboretum site is within flood zones 2 and 3. The sequential assessment submitted with the application demonstrates there are no reasonable alternative areas of lower flood risk within the Arboretum or adjacent to it. Those areas of lower flood risk are already developed, are not sufficient in size to accommodate the proposed development, or are not available now. It is also not appropriate to locate the proposed buildings outside of the planning application area in an area of lower flood risk of flooding, because the proposed buildings are an integral part of the overall experience of the Woodland Memorial. There is a functional need for the proposed kiosk and public convenience in particular to be co-located within the application site in order to provide accessible facilities due to the main facilities being some 700 metres away. The proposed multi-use building will provide a focal meeting space for the memorial and for user groups to use in association with remembrance, including the COVID pandemic. The flooding assessments submitted with the application also demonstrate that there will be no net loss of floodplain storage and therefore no additional risk to people or property surrounding the development. There will be no risk to users on site for the lifetime of the development. Given its location, the Arboretum already has a well-established flood evacuation management plan that will be updated to include the application site as required by the suggested condition 13. This will ensure that any potential residual risk can be safely managed and safe escape routes are included. The development will also be flood resilient with use of appropriate materials and drainage techniques, so in the event of a flood, the buildings could quickly be brought back into use. The flood risk to people and property on-site and off-site is therefore very limited, and it is considered the benefits of the scheme are substantial and would significantly outweigh this very limited risk. The Woodland Memorial will be a nationally important social and educational resource for future generations, alongside enhancing the biodiversity of the application site and the Arboretum as a whole. Economically, it is important to emphasise that the Arboretum is free to visit and therefore relies on funding, donations and the increased spend at the facilities at the site to support and continue its operation. The additional visitors and spending associated with the proposal will support the 90 full-time equivalent jobs on site and generate an estimated £4.3 million in gross value added per year by activities at the Arboretum once the proposal is fully built. Unfortunately, the Arboretum's director, Philippa Rawlinson, is unable to attend, and therefore I have a statement from her that I'll read out now. As the nation's year-round place to remember, we are inundated with requests to create a new space for people to commemorate the incredible service and sacrifice made by key workers during the darkest of times, and remember all those who lost their lives as a result of the pandemic. This ambitious new remembrance space will be a fitting tribute to their service and sacrifice, complementing the Trees of Life Glade dedicated earlier this year. We've learnt a lot about operating a year-round site of national importance in the flood zone over the last 20 years, and this knowledge has been built into our plans as we seek to sustainably extend the Arboretum to allow it to continue to grow and respond to people's ever-changing needs to remember today and into the future. With over 400 memorials... Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry to be sorry to be so strict on this, but we're not really allowed to give any leniency, because if we do, it sets a rather dangerous precedent, of course. But thank you very much indeed. I think you said more or less everything you wanted to say there, didn't you? Thank you. Well, I think, members, you've just heard Councillor Salter. You wish to say something, I think.
Don't let me interrupt you, Chair, if you wanted to carry on with what you
right. All I was doing was really summing up the fact that very grateful there for the presentation by Maria Stacey, and also the statement by Philippa Rawlinson, who made that statement in her absence, of course. As I said earlier, I think we're extremely fortunate to have this on our doorstep, and from what we've just heard, it's quite obvious that this is a vitally important part of the fabric of our society now. And I think this world-renowned site is something that we can and wish to support at every opportunity. Councillor Salter, you wish to say something, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, completely in agreement with you in respect of the importance of the site itself. I spent many hours there myself. And this, I believe, will be a wonderful addition to the whole site. The buildings are not habitable. They are purely functional. And of course, if there would be, looks like they're likely to be a flood, then I'm sure moves would be put in place to evacuate, or just simply not open it before anything happened. And from what I've read and heard, it does appear that the designers, planners, etc., have taken every step to mitigate their and conform with all their riparian responsibilities in respect of any flood management up and downstream. So I personally would certainly support this.
Thank you, Chair. I'm inclined to support the application, but I've got a few queries. What is meant by a low-risk building? Is that the floor raised, and would the pathways be raised?
Thank you very much, Councillor Anketel. I'm going to ask Sarah Atherton just to respond to that. And I know that we have Councillors Evans and Vernon to go. Councillor Evans, did you put your hand up before Councillor Vernon? I'm awfully sorry, because I'm notorious. I'm notorious for taking you out of order, aren't I? So did you put your hand up before? That's very magnanimous and gentlemanly of you. Thank you, Councillor Vernon. So you will be the next one to speak, Councillor Evans. Thank you. Once we've heard from Sarah Atherton. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In response to Councillor Anketell's question, in terms of vulnerability, there is categories contained within the NPPF, so that's the National Planning Policy Framework, which talks about the vulnerability of buildings and infrastructure in flood zones. And they score them between essential, highly vulnerable, more vulnerable, and less vulnerable. The buildings on this particular site are considered to be less vulnerable, primarily, as I think has already been stated, they aren't for habitation. They are purely things like, for instance, a police station, an ambulance station, fire station, may not be required during flooding. So these buildings are not necessarily required during any flooding events. So they're considered to be less vulnerable. And you said about floor levels. Yes, the floor levels have been set. They've been set at least 0.52 above the finished floor levels are set 0.52 meter of a meter above the actual ground level to avoid any instances of flooding. And those resilience measures, as you mentioned, are already in place in the building. So there will be flood resilience designed within the building, including things like the traditional ones with the EA saying raising your plugs and any electrical items further up the walls and things like that. So that's all part of the design and concept of the buildings. Thank you.
Are the pathways also raised?
The pathways are part of the woodland, so no, if it floods, that's when the emergency matters are through you, Chair. Sorry, that's when as I said, that's when if the flood happens, those areas will be taken out of action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you, Councillor Anketell, for your questions as well. Yes, I mean, I think I've been to various locations around the country where there are areas that flood, but the pathways are built in such a way that they have total resilience to flooding. The material will probably be, I don't know whether it's granite or whatever it is, but you have certain stone which is completely resilient to any waterlogging, etc. So I'm sure that all this will be taken into account. But thank you very much. The next one to speak, next member is Councillor Evans, and then it'll be Councillor Vernon. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The Memorial Arboretum is important not only to people in Staffordshire, but across the country and beyond. And I think we have to reflect on that, because this, I think, is an attractive proposal. Done, unfortunately, it's a very worthy cause, but done in an unfortunate situation. And so I think that we should approve this with the conditions that, and whatever was said about going to the Secretary of State, because I think that it is important that there is a lasting memorial to whatever cause, but this is one that is very, very pertinent to an awful lot of people in this country, as I said, and beyond, because it was a terrible time for so many people. And the way that it's laid out and the way we've been told about the water, etc., can be a very reflective time for some people. And so I would, if it has already been moved for approval, I'll second it.
I don't think it was formally moved for approval, unless I missed that. But I think there was a tacit intention to do that from Councillor Salter. So what I'm going to do, Councillor Evans, since you've been the first one to formally propose approval, I'm going to take you as the proposer for approval in line with the officer's recommendation. And then I think, can I please take it as read that you will second that? Thank you very much, Councillor Salter. Okay, any other members wishing to speak? Sorry, Councillor Vernon, and then probably we will take it to the vote. Thank you very much, Councillor Vernon.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just endorsing what other councillors have said, but having read through all 34 pages of this planning application, I'd like to quote one bit, if that is all right, which is 7.11, Staffordshire County Council Flood Risk Officer. The Flood Risk Officer states in their response that the Staffordshire County Council Flood Risk Team are now satisfied with the submitted proposals and have no objection to the granting of planning permission. No objection. Well, if the experts say that, I don't claim to be an expert. I take the advice of our planning officers. And if they advise that we shouldn't object, I can only go along with that. So I have no objection and endorse what the other councillors have said.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Vernon. Yes, I think that's a very sensible comment and a reasonable conclusion to draw as well, that when you have the flood risk officer offering no objection, then it would be perhaps churlish for us to consider doing anything other than proposing approval of this. So we've had a proposal for the approval of this application in line with the officer's recommendation. And remember, we are not the ultimate arbiter in this. All we're doing really is just sending our decision through to the Secretary of State, who will be the final decision maker. But it has been proposed for approval by Councillor Evans, and it's been seconded by Councillor Salter. So I think all I can really do at this stage is ask for a show of hands for those of you who are supportive of that proposal to approve this application. Thank you. Okay, so that is NEMCON. Thank you very much indeed. That is very good to see. I would like to thank all of you for taking part in this and for coming to that conclusion, which of course will now be fed into the process, which will find its way to the Secretary of State, who will make the final decision on this. I think in all my time as a member of the Planning Committee, where the chairman, vice chairman are just one of the members of it, I have never come across a situation where a development in flood zone 3 has met with total approval from all parties. So it just goes to show that there is a first time for everything, isn't there? It'll probably be a long time before we see another one. It's in flood zone 3B. And we wholeheartedly support it. But thank you very much indeed. Just before we finish, I just need to say a few words. The government has today announced that local authorities will be able to, I'm just going to say thank you very much there to the speaker. Thank you very much for coming along this evening. Oh, I thought you were disappearing, but you are disappearing. Okay, all right. Thank you. So a very big thank you there then to Maria Stacey from Pegasus Group for speaking here this evening. Yes, what I was going to say was the government has announced, that was today, I think, wasn't it? Yeah, it's come into effect today, that local planning authorities for a long time have often struggled to be sufficiently well financed to operate effectively. The government seems to have recognised that, and to that end, it has now from today, it's effective from today, local planning authorities are able to increase the fees for major planning applications by 35% and anything other than major applications by 25%. And I think that's very welcome news, because obviously the government is trying to incentivize development around the country. But the problem is that once it comes to local authorities and their planning departments, they've been so under-resourced that it's been very difficult to turn around these applications in good time. So I think that has to be seen as very good news. The information will be appearing on the Lichfield District Council website, but that was just to give you effectively the breaking news about the fact that we can now increase fees, which I think is something, I was speaking with Artemis Christofi on my right earlier, I think that's something which is almost long overdue, and it would have been very nice to have seen something like that maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but at least it's far better, as they say, better late than never. Members, I think that's about it. Have we got another meeting before Christmas? I don't think we have. No, we haven't. So I'm going to say a very happy Christmas to you all and best wishes for the new year, because we shan't be meeting again formally as a planning committee until January. So with that, I'm going to close the meeting at, I think that looks like 6:28. 6:28, and say thank you very much for joining this evening, all the members of the public, and also, of course, all of those who've been watching online. And I wish you all a very happy new New Year and Happy Christmas as well. Thank you. And we look forward to seeing you again in January 2024. Thank you. Good night.